It was 2 o'clock in the morning, cold, silent. Inside the stone walls of Akershus fortress in Oslo, Norway, a man was shaken awake by guards. He had exactly 40 minutes left to live. No crowds, no ceremony, just a wooden stake, a blindfold, and a firing squad of Norwegian soldiers. Men whose country this man had betrayed, humiliated, and handed over to Adolf Hitler. His name was Vidkun Quisling, and on October 24th, 1945, history collected its dead. This is not just the story of one man's downfall. This is the story of what happens when ambition devours conscience, when a brilliant mind chooses power over people and a nation over humanity. Stay with us because this story will shock you from beginning to end. If you're new to war heroes, welcome. We tell the real, unfiltered stories of World War II. The heroes, the monsters, when in the traitor's history never forgets. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because every week we go deeper into the stories that change the world. Now, let's get into it. April 9th, 1940, under the codename Operation Weserübung, Nazi Germany simultaneously invades Denmark and Norway. Denmark falls in less than 6 hours, the shortest military campaign in German war history. Norway fights back, fiercely. The Norwegian resistance holds out for 2 full months before surrendering on June 10th, 1940. Germany's strategic goal is crystal clear: secure Norwegian naval bases to outmaneuver the British Royal Navy in the North Sea and protect the iron ore shipments flowing from neutral Sweden, a lifeline for the Nazi war machine. Yeah, but here's the detail most history books gloss over. Germany doesn't just want Norway's coastline. They want a Norwegian face to put on the occupation. They want someone who looks like a patriot but acts like a puppet. They already have their man picked out. Vidkun Abraham Lauritz Jonsson. Quisling was born on July 18, 1887, in the small village of Fyresdal in southern Norway. His father was a Lutheran minister. His mother came from a wealthy merchant family in Grimstad. By all appearances, this was a boy destined for greatness, the right kind of greatness. And for a while, he delivered. In 1905, the 18-year-old Quisling entered the Norwegian War College. Out of 250 cadets, he scored highest on the entrance exams. Exams so grueling they broke most candidates before they finished. From there, he entered the military academy and graduated with the best grades recorded since the academy's founding in 1817. The King of Norway personally invited him to an audience at the royal palace. This was a man who could have been anything: a general, a statesman, a hero. Instead, he chose to become a villain. In 1918, Quisling was posted to Russia as a military attaché in Petrograd, witnessing the chaos of the Bolshevik Revolution firsthand. While most Western observers were horrified, Quisling was fascinated. He studied how Leon Trotsky built the Red Army from nothing into a disciplined fighting force and filed that lesson away. He concluded that strong authoritarian leadership was not a flaw of governance. It was the only kind that worked. When he spent years in Eastern Europe doing humanitarian work alongside the legendary Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen, distributing relief aid across war-torn Ukraine. He even married a Russian woman, Alexandra Voronina, largely, historians believe, to give her a Norwegian passport and financial security. There was little romance. He soon began living with a Ukrainian woman named Maria Pasechnikova, years his junior, presenting Alexandra as their daughter to acquaintances to keep up appearances. Quisling was brilliant, but he was also cold, calculating, detached from ordinary human emotion in ways that would prove catastrophic for an entire nation. When Quisling returned permanently to Norway in 1929, the political winds of Europe were shifting, fascism was rising, Hitler was climbing, and Quisling, and now deeply influenced by his years in the Soviet Union, was convinced that parliamentary democracy was a dying system, a weakness that would destroy Norway from within. He served as Norway's Minister of Defense from 1931 to 1933, using the position to warn obsessively about communist infiltration. When the Agrarian Party refused to make him their leader, he didn't negotiate. He walked out and built his own movement. In May 1933, Quisling co-founded the National Samling, translated as National Unity, Norway's first openly fascist political party, modeled directly on the ideology of Adolf Hitler. He named himself the party's Führer, leader, deliberately echoing Hitler's own title. But Norwegians weren't buying it. In the 1933 national elections, the National Samling won just 2.2% of the vote. By 1936, and that number had fallen to 1.8%. The party never won a single seat in Norway's parliament. Membership was hemorrhaging. Party finances were collapsing. Here's a detail that tells you everything about Quisling's desperation. He had accumulated a collection of nearly 200 paintings acquired cheaply in post-revolutionary Russia, works he believed were masterpieces by Rembrandt, Goya, and Cézanne. When he tried to sell them to fund his failing political movement, most turned out to be worthless copies. In one painful episode, he and his brother sold a Frans Hals painting for just $4,000, believing it was a fake, only to watch it later be re-authenticated as an original worth $100,000. A failed politician, a man deceived by fraudulent art. Quisling needed a new strategy, and that strategy arrived on the back of a German invasion. When in December 1939, Quisling met personally with both Admiral Erich Raeder, head of the German Navy, and then with Adolf Hitler himself. He warned Hitler that Britain was planning to occupy Norway for its own strategic interests. Whether this was genuine intelligence or calculated manipulation to make himself indispensable, historians still debate. Either way, it worked. Germany began planning the invasion of Norway. On April 9, 1940, the very same morning German forces stormed Norway's coastlines, Quisling walked into a Norwegian radio station in Oslo and made history for the worst possible reasons. He announced live on national radio that Norway had a new government. His government. He declared himself prime minister and ordered all Norwegian military forces to stand down and welcome the Germans. Wait, it was the world's first radio broadcast coup d'etat. Norwegians were furious. King Haakon VII was contacted by the Germans, who demanded he formally appoint Quisling as head of state. The king's response was historic. He told his cabinet that he would sooner abdicate the throne than appoint Quisling, a man in whom neither the Norwegian people nor their parliament had any confidence. The entire cabinet voted unanimously to back the king. Norway would resist. With zero popular support, and even the Germans now embarrassed by their choice of puppet, Quisling's self-declared government collapsed in just 6 days. On April 15, 1940, the Nazi leadership forced him out. It was a humiliation of breathtaking proportions. But the story wasn't over. Norway fell to Germany on June 19, 1940. When King Haakon and Prime Minister Johan Nygaardsvold fled to London, where they established a government in exile and continued directing Norwegian resistance. For the next 2 years, Quisling circled the edges of power, useful enough to keep around, but too toxic for full authority. Then on February 1, 1942, the Germans installed him as minister-president of a national government, a puppet administration run entirely under the supervision of German Reichskommissar Josef Terboven. And now, with the machinery of state behind him, Quisling began his darkest chapter. One of his first official acts as minister-president was reinstating an old constitutional clause banning Jews from entering Norway, a paragraph that had been repealed back in 1851. He then signed a cascade of laws enabling the arrest of all Jewish men in Norway, in the seizure of all Jewish-owned property, and the registration of every Jewish person in the country. At the time of the German invasion, approximately 2,100 Jews lived in Norway, including roughly 350 refugees who had already fled Nazi Germany seeking safety. In October and November 1942, the Norwegian police, acting under Quisling's regime, began mass arrests across the country. On November 26, 1942, the first deportation ship left Oslo with 532 Jewish men, women, and children aboard. Another 158 were deported in February 1943. Smaller groups followed. In total, 772 Norwegian Jews were transported by sea to the German port of Stettin, then by train directly to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most were gassed immediately upon arrival. Only 34 Norwegian Jews deported in this manner survived the war. The rest of the story carries a rare moment of human courage within the darkness. Norwegian policemen and members of the underground resistance quietly warned Jewish families before the raids. Approximately 1,000 Norwegian Jews escaped across the border to neutral Sweden, saved by ordinary Norwegians who refused to become bystanders. Quisling's attempted forced indoctrination of Norwegian children into a Hitler Youth-style organization in 1942 triggered a nationwide crisis. Teachers resigned en masse, churchmen abandoned their posts, and civil unrest swept the country. Even Hitler was reportedly incensed by the scale of the backlash. On August 11, 1942, Hitler formally suspended peace negotiations with Norway, and for the first time banned Quisling from writing letters directly to him. By early 1945, so the war was over in every meaningful sense. Nazi Germany was collapsing. The Eastern Front was gone. The Western Front was crumbling. Quisling made one final trip to see Hitler on January 20th, 1945, begging for a peace deal that would give Norway some form of autonomy and remove it from direct German control. Hitler wasn't interested. Instead, the Nazis ordered a scorched earth policy across northern Norway, destroying infrastructure, burning villages, and shooting Norwegian civilians who refused to evacuate. When Quisling was asked to sign execution orders for thousands of Norwegian resistance fighters, he refused, one of the few acts of defiance in a career defined by collaboration. German Reichskommissar Terboven, furious at the refusal, stormed out of the meeting. Recounting that trip to a friend, Mayor Quisling reportedly broke down and wept, confessing his fear that history would seal his name as a traitor forever. He was right. Adolf Hitler died by suicide on April 30th, 1945. Germany surrendered on May 7th. The following day, Quisling met with resistance military leaders to arrange the terms of his own arrest. He requested one thing, that he not be given preferential treatment over his colleagues. On May 9th, 1945, Quisling and his ministers surrendered themselves to Norwegian police. He was taken to cell 12 at Møllergata 19, Oslo's main police station. A bare room with a tiny table, a basin, and a hole in the wall for a toilet bucket. Guards watched him continuously for 10 weeks to prevent suicide. He was then transferred to Akershus Fortress to await trial. The trial opened on August 20th, 1945. Quisling faced charges of murder, high treason, embezzlement, and conspiracy with Hitler in the planning and execution of Norway's invasion and occupation. Norwegian law did not provide for the death penalty, but an exception was specifically enacted for traitors. In court, Quisling argued he had always acted in Norway's best interests. That collaboration was protection, that he had saved Norway from worse suffering. The prosecution dismantled each claim methodically, using testimony from German officials and British-discovered naval documents that proved Quisling had conspired with Hitler before the invasion, not after. On September 10th, 1945, the verdict came down. Guilty on all but a handful of minor charges. Sentenced to death. October 24th, 1945. 2 a.m., Quisling was awakened inside Akershus Fortress and told he had less than an hour to live. And the execution was carried out in near total secrecy. He was led through the stone corridors of the fortress to a clearing where a wooden stake had been driven into the ground. He was bound to it. A Norwegian firing squad took aim. His last recorded words, "I'm convicted unfairly and I die innocent." The squad fired. Vidkun Quisling, former military genius, failed politician, Nazi collaborator, and architect of Norwegian Jews' deportation to Auschwitz, was dead at 58 years old. His body was cremated, his ashes returned to Fyresdal, the same village where he was born. One day before he surrendered to police, Quisling had said this, and it is worth letting the words hang in the air. "I know the Norwegian people have sentenced me to death, but I want history to reach its own verdict. In 10 years, and I will have become another St. Olav." He was not. While St. Olav became the eternal symbol of Norwegian independence and pride, Quisling's name became something else entirely. It entered the English language as a permanent synonym for traitor, used to this day to describe anyone who collaborates with an invading power against their own people. Politicians across the world have been called Quislings. The word outlived the man. The shame outlived the name. His former residence, Villa Grande, which he grandly called Gimle, after a place in Norse mythology, today houses the Norwegian Center for Holocaust and Minority Studies, where a traitor once plotted the persecution of his own citizens. Scholars now work to ensure those crimes are never forgotten. No tears were shed. No monument was raised. History gave Vidkun Quisling exactly what he deserved. Not silence, but an eternal label. A warning carved into the dictionary itself. That was the story of Vidkun Quisling, the man who sold Norway to the Nazis and paid for it with his life and his legacy. Here on War Heroes, we don't just tell history, we make sure you feel it. If this story hit you the way it hit us, do 3 things right now. Hit like, subscribe to War Heroes, and drop a comment below telling us, do you think Quisling deserved his fate, or was the death penalty too far? We read every single comment.